Marcus Sullivan had grown accustomed to the silence. After 15 years of living alone on his 200-acre ranch in rural Montana, the only sounds he expected were the wind through the pine trees, the occasional lowing of his cattle, and the creak of the old farmhouse settling at night. At 52, he had built a life of predictable routines and comfortable solitude. The ranch had been in his family for 3 generations. His grandfather had homesteaded the land in the 1940s, his father had expanded it in the 70s, and Marcus had inherited it after his parents' deaths in a car accident 12 years ago. What he hadn't inherited was their ability to maintain relationships. His ex-wife Sarah had left him 7 years earlier, taking their teenage daughter Emma with her to Seattle. "You love this land more than you love us," she had said on her way out. Marcus hadn't argued because, in his heart, he knew she wasn't entirely wrong. The divorce had been finalized quietly, and, since then, Marcus had thrown himself into ranch work with single-minded determination. He raised Black Angus cattle, maintained his equipment, fixed fences, and managed his finances with the precision of a man who had nothing else to occupy his thoughts. His nearest neighbor lived 8 miles away, and the small town of Cedar Falls was a 20-minute drive down a dirt road that became impassable during heavy snow. Marcus preferred it that way. People complicated things. They had expectations, emotions, and needs that he struggled to understand or meet. Animals were different. His cattle needed food, water, shelter, and medical care when sick. His border collie, Rex, needed exercise, food, and the occasional scratch behind the ears. These relationships made sense to him. The ranch house itself reflected his solitary lifestyle. Built in 1952, it was a solid 2-story structure with white clapboard siding and a wraparound porch that his grandmother had loved. Inside, the rooms were sparse but clean. The kitchen contained only the essentials, the living room held a worn leather chair facing a stone fireplace, and upstairs, only the master bedroom was furnished. Emma's old room remained exactly as she had left it, though he rarely entered it anymore. On this particular October morning, Marcus followed his usual routine. He woke at 5:30, made coffee in the same chipped blue mug he had used for years, and stepped onto the front porch to survey his domain. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of changing leaves and the promise of an early winter. His breath formed small clouds as he planned his day, checked the cattle in the north pasture, repair a section of fence near the creek, and winterize the equipment in the barn. Rex trotted up beside him, tail wagging expectantly. The dog had been his only companion for the past 3 years, a rescue from the animal shelter in Cedar Falls. Unlike his previous relationships, this one required no complicated emotional navigation. Rex was loyal, hard-working, and asked for nothing more than food and purpose. The two of them walked across the yard toward the barn, their footsteps crunching on frost-covered grass. Marcus's boots were worn but well-maintained, like everything else on his ranch. He believed in taking care of what he owned, whether it was machinery, livestock, or property. It was a philosophy that had served him well in his isolated life. As he entered the barn, the familiar smells of hay, leather, and motor oil greeted him. This was his sanctuary, filled with the tools and equipment that enabled his self-sufficient existence. His grandfather's old Ford tractor sat beside a newer model, both maintained in perfect working condition. Hand tools hung in organized rows on pegboard walls, each one cleaned and returned to its designated place after use. Marcus pulled on his work gloves and loaded hay bales onto the back of his pickup truck. The cattle would need feeding, and he wanted to complete that task before the morning mist burned off completely. Rex jumped into the passenger seat, assuming his position as ranch supervisor and constant companion. Driving across the pasture, Marcus felt the familiar satisfaction of surveying land that belonged to him. Every fence post, every water tank, every head of cattle represented his hard work and careful planning. He had built something substantial here, something lasting. It might be a lonely life by some standards, but it was his life, shaped by his choices and maintained by his efforts. The cattle gathered around the truck as he distributed hay, their massive bodies steaming in the cool morning air. These animals depended on him completely, and he had never failed them. Unlike the humans in his life, they offered no criticism of his choices, no demands for emotional intimacy he couldn't provide, no disappointment when he fell short of their expectations. As Marcus worked, he had no way of knowing that his carefully constructed solitude was about to be shattered. In just a few hours, strangers would appear at his door, bringing with them complications he had spent years avoiding and challenges that would test every assumption he had made about his life and his capacity for human connection. The first sign of trouble came at 2:30 that afternoon when Rex began barking frantically from his position on the front porch. Marcus looked up from the fence he was repairing near the creek, squinting toward the house. In all his years of isolation, unexpected visitors were rare enough to cause genuine alarm. The mailman came on Tuesdays, the propane delivery truck arrived monthly, and his few acquaintances in town called before driving out. Through the afternoon haze, he could make out an old station wagon making its way slowly up his dirt driveway, black smoke trailing from its exhaust pipe. The vehicle moved with the hesitant pace of people who weren't entirely sure they had found the right place. Marcus dropped his wire cutters and walked toward the house, his mind running through possibilities. Perhaps someone was lost, though his ranch was far enough off the main road that accidental visitors were unlikely. As the car drew closer, he could see it was packed with belongings. Suitcases, bags, and boxes filled every available space, and what appeared to be children's toys pressed against the rear window. The station wagon wheezed to a stop near his front steps, and the engine died with a shuddering cough that suggested it might not start again easily. The driver's door opened, and a woman stepped out. She was probably in her 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and clothes that looked like they had been slept in. Her face carried the exhausted expression of someone who had been driving for a long time with nowhere particular to go. Behind her, Marcus could see movement in the car. Children, he realized, though he couldn't tell how many. The woman approached him with cautious steps, her hands clasped in front of her in a gesture that might have been nervousness or prayer. When she spoke, her voice carried a slight accent he couldn't immediately place, and her words came out in a rush as if she expected to be turned away before she could finish explaining herself. "Please, sir, I am so sorry to bother you. My name is Elena Rodriguez. We have been driving for 2 days, and our car is breaking down. The man at the gas station in town said that perhaps you would let us stay just one night. We have some money, not much, but we can pay something." Marcus found himself studying her face, noting the dark circles under her eyes and the way her hands trembled slightly. Behind her, the car doors opened, and 3 children emerged. The oldest appeared to be about 10, a girl with her mother's dark hair but lighter eyes that held too much wariness for someone her age. A boy who couldn't have been more than 7 clutched a stuffed dinosaur and stayed close to his sister's side. The youngest, a girl of perhaps 4, peered around her mother's legs with the curious fearlessness of early childhood. "We are not asking for charity," Elena continued, her chin lifting with a pride that Marcus recognized. "I can work. I can cook, I can clean, I can help with animals. My children are good children, they will not cause trouble. Just one night, please, until we can fix our car and decide where to go next." Marcus felt a familiar discomfort rising in his chest. This was exactly the kind of complication he had organized his life to avoid. These people needed help, but help meant involvement, and involvement meant responsibility for outcomes he couldn't control. His natural instinct was to direct them back to town, to the motel or the church or someone better equipped to handle their situation. But, as he looked at the children, something in his carefully constructed defenses began to weaken. The boy with the dinosaur reminded him painfully of Emma at that age, before adolescence, and his failures as a father had created the distance that eventually drove his family away. The little girl was staring at Rex with delight, and the dog, traitor that he was, had already trotted over to receive her enthusiastic petting. "Where are you folks headed?" Marcus asked, buying time while he wrestled with his instincts. Elena's composure wavered slightly. "North. To Canada. My sister lives in Vancouver. She says she can help us start over, but we must get there first, and the car." She gestured helplessly toward the smoking vehicle. "I think maybe it will not make it much further." Marcus walked over to the station wagon and lifted the hood. Even his limited mechanical knowledge was enough to identify several serious problems. The radiator was leaking, the belts were frayed to the point of imminent failure, and the engine block showed signs of overheating that suggested internal damage. This car wasn't going to carry 4 people to Canada.
It might not even make it back to town.
Mom, can I pet the dog? The youngest girl asked, her voice carrying the sweet lisp of missing front teeth. Elena started to say no, but Marcus surprised himself by speaking first.
Rex doesn't mind kids.
Just let him smell your hand first.
The little girl giggled as Rex sniffed her palm and, then, licked it enthusiastically.
Her siblings moved closer, their wariness temporarily forgotten in the presence of a friendly animal.
Marcus watched them interact with his dog and felt an unexpected tightness in his throat.
Your car's not going anywhere, he told Elena quietly, stepping away from the children so they couldn't hear.
The engine's shot, and there are probably a dozen other problems.
You're looking at more money in repairs than the car's worth. Elena's face went pale, and, for a moment Marcus thought she might cry. Instead, she straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin again.
Then, we will find another way. We will not impose on your kindness.
But, even as she spoke, Marcus was thinking about the weather forecast he had heard that morning. A storm front was moving in from the west, bringing the first real snow of the season. Temperatures would drop below freezing tonight, and the roads would become treacherous. These people had nowhere to go, and their children would be sleeping in a broken car in sub-zero weather. He looked at his house, at the empty rooms that had stood unused for years, and made a decision that would change everything. You can stay tonight, Marcus heard himself saying, the words seeming to come from someone else entirely.
There's a storm coming, and it's not safe to be on the road.
Elena's eyes widened with surprise and relief so profound that Marcus had to look away.
Thank you, she whispered. Thank you so much.
We will not be any trouble, I promise. But trouble, Marcus quickly discovered, was exactly what children were designed to create. Within an hour of moving their belongings into the house, the Rodriguez family had transformed his quiet sanctuary into something resembling a bustling train station. The youngest girl, whose name was Sophia, had appointed herself official tour guide and was showing Rex every room in the house while providing a running commentary about everything she saw. The middle child, Diego, had discovered Marcus's collection of old National Geographic magazines and was sprawled on the living room floor, completely absorbed in an article about deep-sea creatures. The oldest, Isabella, helped her mother unpack their few belongings with the efficient movements of someone who had done this many times before. Elena moved through his kitchen with the confident ease of a woman comfortable in any domestic space, somehow producing a pot of something that smelled better than anything Marcus had eaten in years from the basic ingredients in his pantry. She worked quietly, asking permission before using each item, her respect for his space obvious in every gesture.
Where did you folks come from?
Marcus asked, settling into his usual chair by the fireplace while trying to adjust to the unprecedented noise level in his house. Elena paused in her stirring. Originally from Guatemala, but most recently from Phoenix.
My husband. She glanced at her children, lowering her voice.
He died 6 months ago.
Construction accident.
No insurance, no savings. The bills, the rent, everything became too much. My sister in Vancouver, she is the only family I have left. Marcus nodded, understanding more than she probably realized about starting over after loss.
Long drive from Phoenix.
3 days. We stayed in the car the first 2 nights, but last night we spent our last money on a motel room so the children could have warm baths. Elena's voice carried no self-pity, just the matter-of-fact tone of someone describing a difficult but manageable situation. The car started making bad noises yesterday morning, but I thought maybe we could make it a little further.
Diego looked up from his magazine. Mom, did you know there are fish that live so deep in the ocean they make their own light?
They have special parts that glow in the dark. That's fascinating, Mijo, Elena replied, her face softening as she looked at her son. Maybe Mr. Sullivan knows about deep-sea fish. Marcus found himself drawn into an impromptu lesson about bioluminescence, explaining what he remembered from documentaries he had watched during long winter evenings. Diego listened with the intense focus of a child discovering something wonderful, asking questions that revealed a quick mind and genuine curiosity. Meanwhile, Sophia had discovered the upstairs bathroom and was delighted by the clawfoot tub, which she declared was like a boat for washing. Isabella, more reserved than her siblings, sat at the kitchen table working on homework with the dedicated concentration of a student determined not to fall behind despite their circumstances. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus found himself drawn into their lives in ways he hadn't experienced in years. When Diego asked about the cattle, Marcus offered to show him around the ranch before dinner. When Sofia complained of being cold, he built up the fire in the fireplace and showed her how to arrange the logs for maximum warmth. Elena's cooking filled the house with aromas that reminded him of dinners from his childhood, when his grandmother would prepare elaborate meals that brought the whole family together around the kitchen table. He hadn't realized how much he missed the simple pleasure of sharing a meal with other people until Elena called them all to dinner. They sat around his kitchen table, which suddenly seemed too small for 4 people who talked and laughed and interrupted each other with the easy familiarity of a close family. Diego wanted to know everything about ranching, asking detailed questions about cattle breeding, land management, and seasonal operations. Isabella helped Sofia cut her food and reminded Diego to use his napkin, assuming the role of surrogate parent with practiced ease. Elena watched her children with the fierce protective love that Marcus remembered from his own mother, ready to intervene if they became too loud or demanding. But Marcus found their energy refreshing rather than annoying. For the first time in years, his house felt alive. After dinner, they gathered in the living room. Diego returned to his magazines while Sofia convinced Isabella to read her a story from a worn picture book they had brought. Elena sat on the couch with her youngest daughter, braiding the little girl's hair while humming softly in Spanish. Marcus sat in his usual chair, supposedly reading but actually watching this family that had materialized in his home like characters from someone else's life. He should have felt invaded, overwhelmed by the disruption to his routine. Instead, he felt something he couldn't quite name, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the fireplace. When bedtime arrived, Elena tucked her children into makeshift beds in the living room, using blankets and pillows from their car supplemented by linens Marcus retrieved from long-unused closets. The children settled quickly, exhausted from travel and the emotional strain of uncertainty. As the house grew quiet, Elena and Marcus sat by the dying fire, drinking coffee and avoiding the conversation they both knew was coming. Tomorrow would bring decisions neither of them was ready to make, questions about practical matters like money and transportation and the future that waited beyond his front door. But, for tonight, they were simply 2 adults sharing a peaceful moment while children slept safely nearby, and Marcus discovered that the company of another person didn't always have to be complicated or demanding. Sometimes it could just be comfortable. Marcus woke the next morning to the sound of children's voices drifting up from the kitchen, punctuated by Elena's gentle corrections in Spanish. For a moment, he lay still in his bed, disoriented by the unfamiliar sounds in his house. Then, memory returned, along with the realization that he had slept better than he had in months. Downstairs, he found Elena preparing breakfast with ingredients she must have brought from their car, while the children sat around his kitchen table as if they belonged there. Sofia waved enthusiastically when she saw him, her face bright with the resilience that seemed to be a family trait. "Mr. Sullivan. Mom made pancakes, and she said maybe you would show us the baby cows today." "They're called calves," Diego corrected his sister with the authority of someone who had absorbed yesterday's ranch tutorial. "And they're not really babies if they're born in the spring." Elena looked up from the stove, her expression apologetic. "I hope you don't mind. They are excited about everything here. It's been a long time since they had space to explore." Marcus poured himself coffee from the pot she had prepared, noting that it was stronger and better than his usual morning brew. "Storm hit harder than expected," he said, looking out the window at the 6 inches of snow that had fallen overnight. "Roads won't be passable until the plows come through." He saw relief flash across Elena's face before she could hide it. The decision about leaving had been postponed by weather, removing the immediate pressure they all felt about tomorrow's plans. After breakfast, Marcus found himself leading an impromptu expedition to the barn, with Rex bounding ahead and 3 children bundled in inadequate coats following behind. He showed them how to feed the chickens he kept for eggs, demonstrated the proper way to approach the cattle, and explained the seasonal rhythms that governed ranch life. Diego absorbed everything with intense focus, asking questions that revealed an intuitive understanding of animal behavior and farm operations. Isabella listened quietly, but Marcus noticed she was always positioned to keep watch over her younger siblings. Sophia treated the entire ranch as her personal playground, fearless in her interactions with animals twice her size. "Where we lived before, there was only concrete," Isabella confided to Marcus as they walked back to the house. Diego always wanted to see real animals, but the zoo cost too much money. That afternoon, while the children napped and Elena worked on a project she wouldn't describe, Marcus made a phone call he hadn't planned on making. His ex-wife Sarah answered on the third ring, her voice carrying the familiar mix of wariness and resignation that had characterized their interactions since the divorce.
"Marcus? Is everything all right? You never call unless something's wrong." "I'm fine. I was wondering, how's Emma doing?"
Sarah's pause was long enough that Marcus wondered if the call had been disconnected.
"She's good.
Busy with school, college applications."
"Why?"
Marcus looked out the window at Diego, who was building a snowman with the focused determination of an engineer.
"Do you think she'd want to visit sometime? During Christmas break, maybe?" Another pause.
"Marcus, you haven't asked to see Emma in 2 years.
What's brought this on?"
He couldn't explain about Elena and her children, about the way their presence had reminded him of everything he had lost through his own emotional shortcomings.
"I've been thinking about things. About mistakes I made. Maybe it's time I tried to fix some of them. She's 17 now, Marcus.
She makes her own decisions about relationships.
If you want to reconnect with your daughter, you'll need to put in real effort.
You can't just disappear for years and expect her to pick up where you left off." After the call ended, Marcus sat in his kitchen thinking about second chances and the price of isolation. Through the window, he could see Elena hanging their laundry on his clothesline, transforming the mundane chore into something that looked almost domestic and permanent. That evening, as they gathered for another shared meal, Diego announced that he wanted to be a rancher when he grew up.
"Not the kind who hurts animals," he clarified seriously.
"The kind who takes care of them and makes sure they have everything they need."
"That's called stewardship," Marcus told him. "It means being responsible for something that depends on you. Like how Mom is responsible for us." "Exactly like that."
Elena's eyes met his across the table, and Marcus saw in them a question he wasn't ready to answer. These people had brought more than their belongings into his house. They had brought possibilities he hadn't considered, choices he wasn't sure he was brave enough to make. Over the next 3 days, as the roads slowly cleared and their temporary situation stretched into something approaching routine, Marcus found himself teaching Diego the basics of ranch management, helping Isabella with math homework that was more advanced than anything he remembered from his own schooling, and listening to Sophia's endless stream of observations about everything from cloud formations to the personalities of individual chickens. Elena proved to be not just a gifted cook but an efficient household manager who somehow made his domestic life function more smoothly than it had in years. She mended torn clothes, organized cluttered spaces, and created an atmosphere of warmth that had been missing from his house since his own family had departed.
But Marcus knew this interlude couldn't last forever.
Elena's sister in Vancouver was expecting them, and they had already stayed longer than anyone had planned. The Rodriguez family needed to build a real life somewhere, not exist in the temporary sanctuary of a stranger's hospitality. On Thursday morning, Marcus made a decision that surprised even him. He walked into town, visited the bank, the auto dealership, and the office of a lawyer he had known since childhood. When he returned to the ranch that afternoon, he carried papers that would change everything for both families. "Elena," he said, finding her in the kitchen where she was teaching Sophia to make tortillas.
"I have a proposition for you. I've been thinking about what you said about working, about not accepting charity."
She wiped flour from her hands and gave him her full attention, the wariness returning to her expression. "I need help running this place," Marcus continued.
"More help than one person can provide."
"The house is too big for one person, the land is too much for one person to manage properly."
"I'm offering you a job.
Real work, fair wages, a place for your family to stay while you save money and decide what you want to do next." Elena stared at him for a long moment.
"You are serious?"
"Dead serious.
You're the hardest worker I've ever met,
your children are good kids who could benefit from stability, and. Marcus paused, searching for words to explain something he didn't fully understand himself. This place is better with people in it. I just forgot that for a while. Tears began to form in Elena's eyes, but her voice remained steady. What about Canada? My sister? Vancouver's not going anywhere. You can visit your sister when you're ready, when you have the resources to make choices instead of just running from circumstances. That evening, as they sat around the fireplace discussing practical details like school enrollment and work schedules, Marcus realized that his carefully constructed solitude had been more of a prison than a sanctuary. These people had brought chaos into his ordered existence, but they had also brought life, laughter, and the possibility of connections he had convinced himself he didn't need. Rex lay contentedly beside the fire, surrounded by children who had adopted him as completely as he had adopted them. Outside, snow continued to fall on a ranch that would never again be the domain of just one man and his dog. Inside, a family that had been broken by loss was learning to fit together with a man who had forgotten how to be part of something larger than himself. Marcus Sullivan was no longer alone on his ranch, and, for the first time in years, that felt like the beginning of something rather than the end.